Death is important. In fiction, it's a literary device that can be used to show a character's progression or emphasize the importance of a scene. Death is sacred because it is the finality of a character or characters. The author makes an agreement with the reader, the contract of the closing of a chapter. Of course, this agreement can have several caveats, such as the resurrection or flashbacks to revisit a character post-death, but generally, death is permanent. Most of the time. Chainsaw Man's latest chapter 138 has started to grind my gears. Now before we get into the actual meat of the chapter, let's take a look at how important death is. In Hell's Paradise, a group of criminals and executioners are thrown into an island to find an elixir of life. As events unfold, the island is filled with immortal beings who eventually kill some of the participants in this deadly game of Easter egg hunting. One of the first major deaths is Yamada Asemon Tenza, an executioner who was full of promise only to be fatalityed by one of the immortal beings. The death scene in itself is beautiful, as his death builds up on the world and characters. We know these beings are immortal, and hold humans in contempt. His master was forced to watch his student die before him, emblazoning him with vengeance, and his soon-to-be wife must now find purpose in an uncertain future. His death leads to the progression of mainly two characters. If by some miracle he would come back to life, then the trauma these characters suffered and some of their lessons they would have learned were for nothing. Even to the audience, it would be a big middle finger if this dramatic moment was snuffed out by the characters simply walking back into the show completely fine. Characters, when necessary and legitimate, should stay dead. One example of death done incorrectly is Naruto Shippuden. Now, I dog on Naruto pretty often, but believe it or not, it's still one of my most memorable childhood anime. But seriously, what was Kishimoto thinking when he allowed Kabuto to introduce the reanimation jutsu? I know that the reanimation jutsu was showcased in the Kid Naruto series, but that was only to the extent of 2 individuals. In Shippuden, we go overboard and bring back dozens of fan-favorite characters, all because Kishimoto wanted to. The reanimations, while some being legitimate, are still just fan-servicey bait. There was no real reason to bring back Sasori and Deidara. Sure, they're wacky and they're really fun, but it felt to me like it was just to make the audience remember those, "Oh, I remember that guy" moment. When death is played in this specific manner, sacrificing the literary value of it becomes a turnoff. So before us comes now Chainsaw Man. Let's start off with one important fact. Hybrids are durable as fuck. Hybrids can take in some of the most ludicrous damage out there and still make it out alive. Consider Katana Man, an individual who was ripped in half literally by Denji's chainsaw legs. Yet after the arc is finished, Katana Man is seen arrested while having his balls kicked over and over again. Let's take a look at Kwang Shi, an assassin who is literally, let me say this again, literally decapitated. Yet she survives after one of her fiends triggers her devil form. They are essentially borderline immortal when it comes down to it. But the only problem with this is that several scenes lose their impact if some of the characters come back to life with this latest chapter. See, in this latest chapter, we see the appearance of a character from Part 1, Swordman. Now, if we want to rewind back to Part 1 for a quick second, in Part 1's final arc, Makima summons a bevy of hybrids including Flamethrower, Whip, Spear, and Swordman. These are new faces who, while they were in Part 1, we never really saw them interact in Part 1 to make an effect on us. They look really cool, but that's about it. Familiar faces consisted of Katana Man, Kwang Shi, and fan favorite Rize. So many are now rushing to believe that we will get back all of these characters in Part 2. Now, it's no surprise fans want to see these characters come back. I would argue primarily because we haven't really gotten enough Denji in Part 2, and by bringing back Rize, we're essentially setting up more love/shipping wars because we're just degenerates like that. Because realistically speaking, it is a viable story that Fujimoto can write. Katana Man never really died, but rather was arrested and is probably in public safety's prison chamber. Kwang Shi was decapitated a second time by Makima, but after seeing her decapitated once and brought back to life, it's possible she was resuscitated. Finally, it's completely possible for Rize, on the verge of death in the alleyway of the cafe, to be brought back to life through blood or whatever and become Makima's pet. All these characters are clearly alive in the final fight against Black Sawman, but we never really assumed them to be alive after the fact. See, this is where we might get into some interesting theory crafting. In the final cemetery fight of Part 1, some of the hybrids suffer really horrible deaths, like decapitation or being sliced in half, Kwang Shi and Flamethrower Man. However, Swordman in particular only receives a slash to the chest. Maybe Makima is healing them through some powers or maybe the healing devil, but then she wouldn't have gotten a chance to heal them after she's cut in half by Denji. Maybe there's some funky time rules that might enable some to reappear in part 2 but keep others dead. Or perhaps some of the individuals were literally just zombified versions of themselves who return to the dead after Makima's abilities are cut off. I don't really have a problem with these 4 coming back to life because I always felt like they were jobbers. They look cool, Mr. Pretty Boy over here, but that's about it. We don't really have any other major connection with them, so they're just kind of there. It doesn't feel like a resurrection because they're barely a character. But with Kwang Shi and Rize potentially coming back, it almost sours the endings of both the Bomb Girl and International Assassins arc. Rize's supposed death, or at least her last moments, are so important to Denji's characterization. He finally finds this one girl who isn't trying to groom him, and eventually, maybe, comes to legitimately like him. It's this almost forbidden love aspect to Denji's love life as he waits for someone who never comes. The death and truth behind her not arriving makes the reader understand that Makima is a step ahead of everyone in controlling the events of the world. The world is cruel as we see our innocent puppy dog boy waiting for his love who never makes it. So to just add Rize in again after Denji went through all of that, kinda sucks. But even more importantly, it would have to be Kwang Shi's death scene that would really irk me. So in a few days, I'm about to release my review on the Buddy Stories light novel, and in this 4-story anthology, the best story I consider is a prequel, in some sense, to Kishibe and Kwang Shi when they both work together in public safety. This story contextualizes both these characters and humanizes them. You really understand the weight of their relationship, whatever it may be, anything but romantic. But Kishibe literally seeing his close partner get executed right before him, before he gave a chance to even help her, is gut-wrenching, and I'd argue even more powerful after reading the light novel. After the execution happens, Kishibe still keeps his blindfold on, the audience assuming it's because he's crying. But if he knows that she's all well and alive, then does this scene even matter anymore? After spending plenty of years working with Kwang Shi, you're telling me he's never seen her get decapitated before and come back to life? I feel like if Kwang Shi comes back, I feel like this scene in particular loses a lot of meaning. It's just old Kishibe acting dramatic. It would make me feel like Fujimoto was specifically trying to make the audience feel artificially sad. But let's say the 4 jobbers came back. Highly likely. Let's say the 3 ex-enemies come back. Possible, but uncertain. Now let's say the 2 best friends come back. I think it's probably a done deal that Power will more than likely stay dead and come back as a resurrected blood devil who has a memory wipe. Good. I'm happy with that. Showing the finality of death through mind wipe is a positive in Chainsaw Man because it forces Denji to accept death and learn to live with it. Also, Power isn't a hybrid but a fiend who used up all the available gas she had in the final fight and in her full powered blood devil form. But the one who is now mixing up the equation is Aki. See, Aki is the wild variable that I can't really predict. At the start of the Gun Devil's onslaught on the world, Makima informs Denji that the Gun Devil possessed a dead body. So now we can call it a Gun Fiend, by going with the world rules of Chainsaw Man that Fujimoto has established. But the problem is that Aki is probably still very much alive. I mean, there's 2 major indications, one being he literally calls Denji by name, and the second being that Aki is having a full-on delusion in his head of having a snowball fight. I assume dead bodies aren't supposed to be having these types of thoughts? You know, they're supposed to be dead? So, is he also some sort of hybrid under the control of Makima, or is he a fiend? Because I don't think fiends are supposed to be having these POVs of their best friends and memories. Still, whatever situation happens, Aki must stay dead. The chapter right after Aki's death is one of the most saddest, impactful, bawling out of your eyes chapters that Chainsaw Man has. It's so heavy, and I feel like it would all be undone if suddenly Gun Hybrid Aki shows up scolding Denji. Yeah, it would look cool, don't get me wrong, and I'd be really happy because I love Aki. I won't even try to deny that fact. But I feel like more emotional weight would be sapped out of this important scene if he's just coming back, if everyone's just completely fine and these death scenes or pseudo-death scenes didn't even really matter. Is it really that far-fetched to say that Makima probably showed up after Denji, took control of the Gun Fiend's body that was barely alive, and has it locked away in some basement, now freed with Makima's death? If Fujimoto wants, Fujimoto has. I think Fujimoto has become aware of the fact that Denji, Power, and Aki are a really fun trio to have, and honestly I feel like he probably wishes he wrote more about this trio doing everyday stuff because that's what the fans really want. I mean, I suspect that's why the Buddy Stories light novel was created, to give more of these scenes. We like to see them as this sort of dysfunctional family. It wouldn't surprise if for the hell of it he made Power regain her memories and Aki as a gun hybrid come back from the fray, because why the hell not? I mean, I already see some members of the community celebrating that these two characters might be coming back, all due to solely the existence of Swordman returning. I don't want Fujimoto to bring back some of the characters from part 1. I know we love some of these characters, but if anything, I always believed that part 2 was a story of growth. Part 2 wants to show how Denji will deal with the emotional trauma of loss. The fight against the Falling Devil was a prime example as how we see Power and Aki in his memories and how badly it emotionally and mentally messed him up. It shows that he's more human, and while seeing them reunite again with no conditions would be wholesome, I can't help but feel slightly cheated. Need I remind you also that part 2 isn't Denji's story. As of late we've been getting more Denji-centric chapters, but remember, part 2 is still Asa's story. And I know for some, they don't like her, or rather it's they want to see more Denji, but I feel like people want to see Rize come back so that Denji gets the spotlight again due to shipping and love scenes. I understand that. Sometimes we have to realize what the author wants. Denji will definitely have a role, and we'll definitely get more scenes of him, but Asa is still another main character that we have to focus on. Maybe Fujimoto's playing us like a damn fiddle, and the only person he decides to bring back was Swordman, which would be unbelievably hilarious and completely in character for his writing. My final argument is this: the dead should stay dead, and hybrid durability might prove to be a writing tool to not have a character die. It works, it's legitimate, but I understand the rules of the world, and if Fujimoto wishes to do it, he can do it. What do you guys think of potentially bringing back fan favorite characters back to life? I'd love to hear your responses in the comment section down below.